So for those who are here for maybe the first time in a number of weeks, we're right in the middle of a sermon series called Who is This Jesus? Who is this Jesus? Who is this Jesus? Who is this Jesus? Who is this guy? And so far we've heard the voice of people who claimed him as the Messiah, using terms that were unmistakably brought from the Jewish tradition, the laws and the prophets that spoke about the Messiah they had been longing for. We heard him spoken of as the Messiah. We heard John call out to his disciple, to those who were there gathered at the riverside, "Look, here is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world." And we learned that Jesus was doing something new, that he had come not just for one group of people, but for all people. And then after Jesus was baptized, we heard the voice of God say, "This is my Son, my beloved, in whom I am well pleased." We've over the last couple of weeks, we've heard Jesus step into his power, to take ownership of his power and authority to forgive sins, to heal sickness. And we've also seen him stand up to the laws of the time that were more for the sake of certain people and less for the sake of all people. And he opted for laws that were based on the good of the people. Healing on the Sabbath was way, way, way more important than somebody saying you couldn't do that. Because the Sabbath, he told us, is for man. Man is not for the Sabbath. And Jesus declared himself Lord of the Sabbath. So that's why we're here, because this is our Sabbath. And Jesus is Lord of this day. All right. So today we're going to talk about this storm, this story that lots of us have heard lots of times. But I want to talk to you about what it is to go from fear-filled, can I get that slide? From fear-filled to fearless. What an order, right? Anybody who's ever been gripped in fear knows that the idea of going from fear-filled to fearless is huge, like crazy hard. So let's talk for a minute about fear. Fear is an awful thing. The fabric of our lives are shot through with it. And I know some acronyms for fear. The first one is false evidence appearing real. How many times have you had a fear in your life and it's had a hold of your heart, and by the time you get past that, you realize, wow, that was not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Whether it is an exam, whether it is a fight with a friend, whatever it is, it's false evidence appearing real, but boy, it grabs us, right? Boy, it grabs us. The next one is about some of what sometimes we do with fear, and that is forget everything and run. Avoid it. Deny it, leave town, go somewhere else, or just shut down by whatever ways that we do, whether it's reading a book or playing a video game or whatever. Forget everything and run. The next one, though, is what I want us to consider, because fear calls us to face everything and recommit. Because our fearlessness, the possibility, the very hope of our fearlessness as Christians is grounded in the fact that we have a God who loves us, is present with us, and can take any situation and make it good, no matter how it looks at the time. That's the God we serve. And so that God calls us to treat fear as an invitation to face everything and recommit. So how is it that we go from fear-filled, can we get that one up here again? From fear-filled to fearless. Vicki?
You want me to go back?
Okay, yeah. No, it's okay. So how do we go? Don't worry about it. How do we go from fearful to fearless? Fear-filled to fearless. When I'm afraid, it gets me like talons in my belly. Come on. How many have had fear like that? Over a physical illness, over something, whatever. That kind of fear that grabs you like talons in your belly, and it grabs you and it takes you for a ride. It has all the power, doesn't it? I will rearrange my entire life for fear. I won't make good decisions to do it, but I will, right? I will try to control people, places, and situations to alleviate my fear. That's kind of a human tendency. It's not just mine. So, how do we go from fear-filled to fearless? How do we take that invitation to face everything and recommit? Let's look at the story, because our answer is there in this story. So before we get into that, the story itself, we just want to tell you that Jesus has started his day preaching to a crowd of people on the Jewish side of the lake, right? On the Hebrew side of the lake, from a boat, and he has taught them all day long into the evening. And this was the first time he spoke in parables, which would become one of his primary teaching methods. And so in the beginning of chapter 4 is a whole collection of parables. And then at the end of that, we get to this passage. So at the end of the day, after a long day of preaching, we get to this first verse. So the first verse, on that day. So Mark is all about the immediate, right? He's action, right? So he tells us on that day when evening had come. And then he goes on to say, he said to them, let us go across to the other side. Now, the other side, in the course of like 4 chapters in Mark, from chapter 4 to chapter 8, they go to the other side, right? What you need to understand is when he talks about the other side, in this case, he's talking about the Gentile side of the lake, the Roman side of the lake, the foreign side of the lake, the bad side of the lake, the don't go there side of the lake. Because for the Hebrew people, they had been steeped in this tradition that it was us in our little safe God box and them who we needed to keep out because they would tarnish us and make us dirty. Really, that's the message. And so he's now saying to all of his followers, let's go to the other side of the lake. And to us, it's just the other side. To them, it would have been a fear-producing statement. They didn't go there. They didn't belong there. That was a scary place. That was potentially a dangerous place. They liked to stay on their side of the lake. They didn't fish on that side of the lake. They didn't swim on that side of the lake. They just didn't. And Jesus said, let us go across to the other side. All right. And leaving the crowd behind they took him. Now, we've talked a little bit about Jesus calling his followers. We've heard about tax collectors. We've heard about different people who were called. And we've heard that he called fishermen. So, when they took him with them in a boat, who do you think was running the boat? The tax collectors? Nah. Those are the fishermen running that boat. It's probably their boat that they had walked away from, to start following him in the first place. And they're going to take him in their boat because they have the knowledge, the human knowledge and wisdom and experience to get him across get them all across the lake safely. So they take him, right? They take him across, and they took him across with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. Now, I don't know about you. I have heard this story lots of times, like lots and lots of times, because I grew up in the church, and this is one of those ones that we like to teach in Sunday school. I had never heard this sentence, other boats were with him. In retrospect, it makes complete sense, because these were not really big boats, and there were a lot of people. I mean, even not just the crowds that he taught, but just the people that walked with him. There were actually a lot of them. So now we've got kind of a fleet of fishing boats, probably all run by fishermen, going across to this scary other side of the lake. And a great gale arose, a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat. I don't know how many of you have been on the internet. If you have the internet and you haven't, just type in waves in the boat. And the YouTube videos that come up are terrifying. And those are like great big boats, right? And those waves come over the bow and, right? These were not big boats. Of course, they weren't on the full sea, right? They were on the Sea of Galilee, which is kind of like a big lake. But there's something about the way that the lake is positioned and the topography that these huge storms could just come up like this, right? So they're in a great windstorm comes up, they're in the boat, the waves are coming in over the side, and the boat was being swamped, right? And so where was Jesus? Jesus was in the back of the boat, asleep on the cushion. I can't get over that there's a "the" there, the cushion. Makes me think that there was like a cushion for the guy who ran the boat, but he let Jesus have it because he was so exhausted from teaching. I don't know. But Jesus was in the back, asleep, in the middle of a storm. Sound asleep. He's not afraid, right? I'm sure that he's aware, but he's not afraid. So what do? They woke him up. Now, Jesus was asleep. He wasn't afraid. I just want to highlight to you, I want to ask you a question. When Jesus got in that boat to go to the other side, do you think his trust was in the fishermen who were operating the boat? Or do you think his trust was in his Father who had a plan for him? Because I'll tell you what, if he had been only trusting in the skills of men and that water started coming in the boat, he would have been just as afraid as they are. The only thing that allowed him to sleep like that is because his life throughout his ministry was completely and totally in the hands of his Father. The Father who said, "This is my Son, my beloved. In him I am well pleased." He didn't have a care in the world. He was there to do something, and he could sleep right through it all. They, on the other hand, could not. And so they woke him up. They woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Do you not care?" Now, the first thing I want to point out to you is that when they woke him up, that's where the story changed. They asked for help. He was asleep, and they woke him up. Why? Because their human skill and talents and experience were not sufficient to deal with the waves beating over the side of the boat. They were afraid because their self-reliance, their ability to count on their own ideas and experience failed them. They could not see any way how they were going to get from where they were to shore. They woke him up. Do you not care? And he woke up and he rebuked the wind. Now, I want to show you something. When you've got a word, who has a smartphone? Who has a smartphone? Everybody, lots of people. Okay, so this is, a great Bible study tool. I don't know if you realize that. It doesn't just get texts and browse Facebook or whatever else. It's a great study tool because I had a sense of what rebuked meant, but I needed to look it up. And rebuke means express sharp disapproval or criticism of someone or something because of their behaviors or actions. Other words would be reprimand, reproach, reproof, scold, admonish, and finger waving. So essentially, what the Bible tells us is Jesus got up and he said, "What the heck are you doing?" I don't know what he said. He probably said it in a much, more godlike, but he said it, and he probably said it really loudly. He rebuked the wind. And then he said to the sea, "Peace, be still." And immediately, he rebuked the wind, he said to the sea, and immediately the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. And that particular phrase kind of made me chuckle, because I happen to know that you don't want to be in a dead calm in a sailboat either, right? So I don't know if they were sailboats, but that's what I had in my mind. So the wind ceased. Now, for a lot of people, including the disciples, this was the turning point in this story, right? Because Jesus stood up and showed his authority over the elements. He scolded the wind and told the sea to calm down. And it did. And then he turned to them and he said, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" Now, these two sentences make me really uncomfortable, because they had a reason to be afraid. They had a reason to be afraid. And I feel like he's rebuking them too for being afraid. But the point is that these men and women had been with him for weeks, watching him heal people, cast out demons, right? And what they had just encountered was something they hadn't seen him do. This is where fear happens for us, when we encounter something in our lives that we haven't seen God get us through. We get fearful. So God said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" Well, quite frankly, what made them wake him up? It may have been desperation, but faith often comes disguised as desperation, right? We will finally call out to God when we're desperate. "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe. What else could you be? He's just taken command of the weather, of the elements. The very thing that you were afraid of, he has now rendered mute. They were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" Who then is this? That's the question we've kind of been asking, right? Who then is this? When things happen in our lives, that's actually a very appropriate question. Who then is this who made all of this stuff turn out okay? Who then is this? And if you haven't been asking it of your life up till now, you can look back over your life and ask it of all of the situations that you thought were going to destroy you that didn't. Who then was that? Guiding me, carrying me through all that. Who then is this. This is the question. This is the question we should be holding in our hearts all the time. All the time. Who is this Jesus? So, Jesus wasn't afraid because Jesus trusted God. His trust wasn't in the human abilities of the people running the boat. He was fine to let them run the boat, but his trust was in God. He could sleep through the storm. The guys running the boat, right, came to the end of all their skills and abilities to the ways that they could rely on themselves, and it wasn't adequate. It wasn't enough. They were going to die, and they had no other way of controlling that situation. So they did what any smart person does. They asked the one who had the power. They called out. They woke him up, and they asked for his help. And he took this thing, this huge, complicated, scary thing, this storm that was threatening to drown them, to swamp them, to take them under to their deaths. He took it and calmed it. And they were blown away, rightfully so, completely and totally awestruck by the whole thing. So, back to the questions we asked earlier. How do we move from fear-filled to fearless? How does fear affect us? What do we do? Do we run? Do we freeze? Do we make fear-based decisions, which usually, in my experience, just makes everything worse? Do we avoid the issue? Or none of the above? Remember the acronym? Face everything and recommit. We do what the disciples did. Whatever our storm is in our life, we let the fear that we feel be a flag. The fear that we feel be a flag to ask God for help. Now, when I talk about prayer, when I talk about asking God for help, I'm not saying then put your brain aside. Like, this isn't, like magic, right? But the decisions we make based in fear are often really, really bad decisions because we're scrambling. We just want to get it, come on. You know that energy. Don't you know that? Who knows that energy? I got that fear. It's got its talons into me, and I just want to, just gotta get, I have never, ever, ever had a good idea or made a good decision from that energy. Ever. Anybody here ever make a good decision, a sound decision from that energy? Thanks for not raising your hand if you did. But anyways, the point I'm trying to make is not that we ask God and then we don't do anything. Because that's not the kind of relationship we have. We ask God and then we get past the fear and we see the horizon a whole lot differently. And then, from a place of faith, we can make the best decisions and the best choices and find the best course of action. Not from help me. You're bigger than this, and I don't know what to do. From that place, we become open to possibilities outside of our own limited understanding. We become open to help from people and places and situations that we wouldn't have before have looked to. We become ready. So, how do we overcome fear? Let's go to the next one. This is how we overcome fear. We say, "Dear God." Now, I call God beloved. You might have picked that up from my leadership. But, we call God by the name that is meaningful to us. The point is not, we call God. The point is that we do. Dear God, and we go on. Dear God, please remove this fear. We are specific about our request. We don't say, just make it all better. We say, remove this fear. It's not about the situation. What's killing us is this feeling of desperate energy that is threatening to overwhelm us and lead us in bad decisions. Please remove this fear and direct my attention to what you would have me be. Now, the first time anybody suggested this prayer to me, I thought they were crazy. Why? Because when I'm in fear, I don't want to know what to be. I want to know what to do. Action, 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 action. I want to know what I'm going to do to make it better. This prayer is counterintuitive. That's why it's a good one. Because when I'm afraid, my intuition is wrong. Please remove this fear and direct my attention to what you would have me be. Now I'll tell you, almost invariably, over my life, probably like the last 17 years that I've been consciously using this prayer, every time I say to God, "Dear God, beloved one, please remove this fear and direct my attention to what you would have me be," the answer that comes radiating to me from deep inside myself is, "I would have you be Sue." And I go, I can do that. It's about all I can do well, but I can do that. And somehow that's very calming, because I don't have to do anything more than I'm able to do. That's it, right? And because I have turned my will and my life over to God, because I am convinced that the best life for me, the best life for my family, the best hope we have for all of the good we could possibly experience, all of the blessings God could possibly pull into our lives, because I'm convinced of that, I end the prayer with, "Your will be done," because it's not about me. And that's the most important thing for me to remember. That's what the disciples knew when they woke him up. At that point, it was no longer about them. What are you going to do about it? He was big enough. God is big enough. We let fear be a flag to remind us that we can face everything and recommit. Faith is a choice. It often comes dressed up like desperation, but it is a choice. And this prayer has walked me through some really, really awful, horrible, scary situations in my life. Sometimes I have to pray it over and over and over again in the particularly tumultuous situations. But it gives me that window of peace, that moment of calm in the middle of my storm, where I perhaps can see what my next step will be. This, my friends, is how we move from fear-filled to fearless. Because just as Jesus trusted his Father, we can trust the both of them. We're going to take some time in quiet to reflect on what you've heard, not just in the sermon, but